Imagine a scene etched in time. Fort Worth, Texas, the year 1971. A young mother, desperate, casts a line into the sea of newspaper classifieds, searching for a babysitter. Just 3 days later, her 21-month-old child is swallowed by the morning haze, spirited away by a specter in white gloves under a blistering summer Sunday. For 51 years, the ghost of her name whispered through the cold corridors of missing persons files, while her family's hope burned like a stubborn flame. But this is where the story twists into the unbelievable. The answer to this half-century wound wasn't buried in a forgotten grave or lost across the country. It was breathing the same Texas air, a secret festering just miles away, a phantom living in their very shadow. And when the truth was finally dragged into the light by a revelation no one could have predicted, it would prove that even the most frozen of cases can shatter with the elegant simplicity of a single DNA strand. This is the tale of how science became a miracle, how faith refused to die, and how a family, torn apart by 5 decades of silent screams, was finally made whole again. Before we descend into the heart of this labyrinth, I ask a small favor. Let a one materialize in the comments below if you, like me, are drawn to the shadows of true crime, and be certain to subscribe, for we unearth such haunting tales every single week. Believe me, the darkness we're about to explore is something you won't want to face alone. And tell me, from which state do you watch this story unfold? I find a strange comfort in knowing where our family of sleuths gathers. Now, let us begin a story so profound, it will forever alter the way you look at the ghosts of the past. The calendar read 1971, and Fort Worth, Texas, was a city breathing in time with the American dream, a place of working-class souls, carving out a life against the grain of a world that offered little for free. That summer, the sun was a merciless tyrant, beating down until the asphalt wept, and every living thing scurried for the mercy of shadow. Within the humble walls of the Spanish Gate Apartments on East Seminary Drive, a young mother named Sarah Morrison was caught in the solitary battle of single motherhood, a struggle as raw and real as the blistering heat outside. At only 22, Sarah was a girl playing the role of a woman, navigating the bewildering map of motherhood with only her own young instincts to guide her baby daughter, Jennifer. The recent fracture from her husband, Michael, had left her adrift in a sea of financial and emotional turmoil. Her small apartment, a space she shared with a roommate, felt like a pressure cooker, cramped, suffocating, and perpetually losing its war against the Texas sun, even with the window unit rattling in protest. Yet, it was a sanctuary, a fragile haven, purchased with the meager earnings of a waitress's endless shifts. Her life was a litany of long hours spent on tired feet at a local diner, a world of impatient patrons, and the lingering scent of coffee and fried food that clung to her like a second skin. The day's earnings were a fickle tide, sometimes kind, often cruel, but a complaint rarely passed Sarah's lips. Her purpose was singular: baby Jennifer. That small child, with eyes like nascent stars and a laugh that could shatter the gloom, was the reason for every exhausted muscle, every endured slight. At 21 months, Jennifer was a blossoming miracle, a creature of first words, wobbly journeys that became joyful sprints, and a spirit so vibrant it made Sarah's heart ache with a fierce, protective love. But to be a young, single mother in 1971 was to be an island in a vast, indifferent ocean. The world was not built for her survival, let alone her triumph. Affordable care for a child was a myth whispered among the hopeful, and finding a trustworthy soul to guard your heart while you earned a living was a quest for a ghost in the fog. With her own family scattered to distant states, Michael a fading echo in her past, and friends consumed by their own private storms, Sarah was utterly, terrifyingly alone. And so, Sarah did what countless other mothers on the brink had done before her. She turned to the ink and paper oracle of the Fort Worth Star, Telegram's classifieds. On one sweltering August afternoon, she sat at her small kitchen table, a pencil her only wand, and carefully summoned a few hopeful words. Responsible babysitter, needed for weekday care. Toddler girl, good pay for the right person. Each word was a coin she counted, a cost measured against her dwindling funds, before sealing the ad in an envelope with money that was meant for groceries. But there was no choice, was there? In her world, the options had been cruelly narrowed to 2. Work, or watch her world fall apart. Her small plea appeared in the Sunday edition, and by Monday morning, the telephone began its shrill summons. The calls were a parade of dead ends, rates too high, schedules misaligned, or something dissonant in a stranger's tone that pricked at her intuition. Sarah believed she possessed a keen sense for people, a kind of internal compass honed by years of reading faces across a diner counter. She thought she could sense the shadows in a person's voice. And then, a different kind of call cut through the noise. It was a woman's voice, a melody of calm professionalism, laced with a disarming warmth that flowed through the receiver and soothed Sarah's frayed nerves. "Hello," the voice purred. "I'm calling about your babysitter position. My name is Ruth Johnson, and I have extensive experience with young children." A spark of hope ignited within Sarah. She sat taller, shifting the phone to her other ear, as if to hear the promise more clearly. "Oh, that's wonderful," she said, her voice brighter. "Please, tell me about yourself." The words that followed were a perfectly woven tapestry, a story so smooth and rehearsed it felt like a dream tailored for a mother's deepest anxieties. Ruth painted a picture of a spacious home with a sprawling, fenced-in yard, a sanctuary for a small child. She spoke of her own children, now grown, and a heart that yearned for the sound of little feet. She was a purveyor of wholesome meals, a believer in gentle guidance, and an almost telepathic mind reader of a working mother's need for unwavering dependability. "I can begin immediately," Ruth concluded, her tone infused with an unshakable confidence, the sound of a key turning perfectly in a lock. "And my schedule is pliable, should you ever need to work later." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah felt the crushing weight on her shoulders begin to dissolve. This woman, this voice, was flawless perhaps. A fleeting whisper in her mind suggested, "Impossibly so," but she silenced that whisper. Desperation was a louder voice, and Ruth Johnson sounded like the answer to every prayer she had tearfully offered into the lonely dark. An arrangement was made to meet at the diner, a neutral ground where the fluorescent lights left no room for shadows, a place where Sarah could finally put a face to the voice. The rendezvous was set for Wednesday, during the brief respite of her afternoon break. As Sarah placed the receiver back in its cradle, a fragile, unfamiliar feeling bloomed in her chest. Hope. But Wednesday arrived, and then it bled into the late afternoon, and Ruth never appeared. Sarah sat captive in a booth by the window, her gaze fixed on the sun-baked parking lot, her eyes tracing the path of every arriving car. The hands on her watch crept forward, each tick a small death to her optimism. After an hour had passed, the demands of her job called her back, and the hope she'd harbored curdled into the familiar, bitter taste of disappointment. Another mirage in the desert. That evening, however, the telephone rang once more. It was Ruth, her voice a cascade of sincere apology, every word a plausible thread in a well-spun story. "Sarah, I am so terribly sorry. My car failed me on the highway, and I had no way to reach a phone. The thought of you waiting there has haunted me all day. Please, allow me another chance. I feel so strongly that I can help you." The contrition in her voice felt authentic. The excuse was entirely believable. Cars were fickle beasts under the relentless Texas Sunday. And Sarah was standing on a precipice. Her hours at the diner were becoming more demanding. Her roommate's availability was shrinking, and the specter of rent, due in just 2 weeks, loomed over her. The walls were closing in. "All right," Sarah conceded, her word a surrender to the small, insistent voice of caution that still whispered in the back of her mind. "When are you able to start?" "What about Monday?" Ruth proposed. "I'll come directly to your apartment in the morning to collect Jennifer, and I will have her back to you by evening. You won't have to concern yourself with a single thing." A rate was settled upon, fair enough not to arouse suspicion. The address was confirmed. Ruth then moved through a checklist of care, inquiring about Jennifer's daily rhythm, her preferred foods, any hidden allergies. It was a masterful performance of diligence, asking every question a devoted caregiver would. By the time the line went dead, Sarah had fully convinced herself that the storm had passed, that everything was going to be fine. Over the weekend, Sarah moved with the focused ritual of a loving mother. She assembled a diaper bag as if preparing for a long expedition, filling it with an abundance of diapers, wipes, a fresh set of clothes, and Jennifer's treasured stuffed rabbit. She penned pages of detailed instructions, a sacred text of nap schedules, dietary quirks, and a litany of emergency contacts, including her number at the diner, her roommate's whereabouts, and the name of their pediatrician. Sleep was a fleeting ghost that Sunday night. Sarah lay awake in the dark, her mind a frantic carousel of lists and second guesses. A cold tendril of doubt would curl around her heart, only to be beaten back by the hard reality of her situation. She had no other choice. Monday morning and the relentless demands of a life lived on the edge were waiting for her. Monday, August 23rd, 1971, broke across the sky with a suffocating heat. The sun, a hostile eye, staring down before it had even cleared the horizon. Sarah leaned over her daughter's crib, kissing the warm cheek of a still sleepy Jennifer, whose small hands reached out instinctively for a final embrace. "Mama will be home tonight, my sweet girl," Sarah whispered, inhaling the sacred scent of innocence. "You be good for Miss Ruth." At 7:30 in the morning, Sarah walked out into the oppressive heat, a knot of anxiety and guilt tightening in her stomach. She had entrusted the handoff to her roommate, Jessica, who was to wait for Ruth's arrival at 9 o'clock. Jessica was a steady presence, a friend who knew and loved Jennifer. Sarah's final instruction to her was a lifeline. If anything at all, felt wrong about this woman, Jessica was to call the diner without a moment's hesitation. The hours at the diner bled into one another, a monotonous rhythm of clattering plates and endless coffee pots. Sarah's eyes were magnetically drawn to the wall clock, watching the minute hand labor its way toward 9, and then creep agonizingly past it. Silence from the telephone was a good sign, wasn't it? It had to mean that Ruth had come, that Jennifer was safe, that the plan was unfolding just as it should. But had a vision of her own doorstep flashed before Sarah's eyes in that moment, she would have torn off her apron and run screaming through the streets of Fort Worth. For at precisely 9 o'clock, a sharp rap sounded on the apartment door, and Jessica, with a trusting smile and Jennifer balanced on her hip, swung it open to greet the day. The figure in the doorway fit the general description Sarah had provided, a woman of medium height and middle years, with a tidy, unassuming air. And yet, an immediate and profound sense of wrongness washed over Jessica, a cold dread that started in her gut. The Texas morning was a furnace, the temperature already climbing toward 100 degrees, in an atmosphere so humid you could drink it. This woman, however, was dressed for a blizzard, or perhaps a wake. Long, immaculate white gloves sheathed her hands and forearms, erasing any trace of her skin. A scarf was coiled tightly at her throat, a baffling defiance of the stifling air, while a bonnet-like head covering shadowed her hair and the contours of her face. Dark glasses served as a final mask, hiding her eyes from the world. Her attire was pristine, but it was an armor of absurdity, a costume of deliberate concealment. It was utterly, terrifyingly wrong. "Ruth Johnson?" Jessica ventured, the question laced with a thread of doubt she could no longer suppress. "That's right, dear. I've come for little Jennifer." The voice, though slightly muted by the fabric at her throat, was placid and kind. A smile formed on her lips, but it was a disconnected thing, an expression that found no echo in the sliver of face left visible to the world. A chill of hesitation crept over Jessica. A primal scream echoed in the chambers of her mind, urging her to slam the door, to call Sarah, to refuse this strangely garbed spectre, the precious child. But Sarah's desperation had been a palpable thing. She had hired this woman, had left explicit orders to let Ruth take Jennifer. Jessica, caught in the cross-current of fear and obligation, did not want to stir the waters, to cost Sarah a caregiver she so desperately needed. "Sarah left these for you," Jessica murmured, her hand extending the diaper bag, a small, carefully packed vessel for a journey unknown. "Everything Jennifer could possibly need is inside. She just ate about an hour ago, so she should be content until lunchtime." The woman, a phantom in white gloves, reached out, her fingers closing around the bag before her arms opened toward Jennifer. "Come to me, little one. We're going to have a day of wonders." And Jennifer, still in that blissful age before the shadows of strangers take form, floated willingly into the woman's embrace. Her wide, innocent eyes glanced back at Jessica, her small hand clutching a stuffed rabbit, a silent passenger on a voyage from which there would be no return. "At what hour should I bring her back to the fold?" the woman inquired, her voice a disquieting calm. "Sarah is free at 6, so any time after that would be fine." "Perfection. We shall see you in the twilight then." The woman turned, a fluid motion, and carried Jennifer down the long, open-air corridor of the apartment complex. Her skirt whispered against the concrete with each step, those stark white gloves, a cage around Jennifer's small, trusting form. Jessica watched them recede, a knot of ice tightening in her stomach. She almost cried out, a wordless plea to stop them. But what could she say? The woman had a name. She was expected. On the surface of things, all was as it should be. Jessica closed the door, trying to banish the cold dread, whispering to herself that it was only paranoia's ghost. The woman in white gloves glided to the parking lot, to a car so utterly nondescript it seemed to blur at the edges of memory, a vessel designed to be forgotten. She settled Jennifer into the back seat, took her place behind the wheel, and drove away from Spanish Gate Apartments. She drove away from Fort Worth. She drove away from the entire map of Jennifer's existence. And for the next 51 years, it was as if she had simply driven off the edge of the known world. Let me know in the comments which abyss you want us to gaze into next, because this story is a wound just beginning to open, and you cannot imagine the darkness that lies within. The clock struck 6, releasing Sarah from her shift. She flew to her car, her heart racing ahead, already picturing Jennifer, already eager to hear the tale of her first day with the new sitter. The drive home was a torment, traffic a thick, slow-moving river when all she craved was the sanctuary of her daughter's arms. She finally pulled into the complex, snatched her purse and keys, and took the stairs in a desperate, breathless climb. Sarah burst through the door to find Jessica in the kitchen. "How was it?" she asked, her eyes darting around the empty room. "Where is my baby?" Jessica turned from the sink, her hands slick with soap. "Ruth hasn't returned with her yet. I imagined they'd gone to the park, perhaps, and lost track of the hour." Sarah's gaze shot to the clock on the wall. 6:15 in the evening. "Did she mention she might be late?" "No, but I'm certain they'll be here any moment." Jennifer was perfectly happy when she left this morning. Sarah fought to quell the serpent of anxiety coiling in her gut. Babysitters run late. It happens. A stop for ice cream, a nap in the car seat that Ruth didn't want to disturb. There were 1,000 reasonable explanations, tiny shields against a nameless fear. Everything was fine. By 7 o'clock, Sarah was a ghost pacing the confines of her small living room, her vision fixed on the window, searching for headlights that never came. By 8, she was on the phone with the diner, a desperate, illogical hope that Ruth might have taken Jennifer there. By 8:30, her hands trembled so violently she could barely dial the number for the Fort Worth Police Department. "I need to report my daughter missing," Sarah uttered, the words feeling like shards of glass in her throat. To speak them aloud was to give the nightmare phone. A babysitter took her this morning, and she never came back. 2 patrol officers arrived within 30 minutes. Officers James Martinez and David Thompson, men seasoned by the city's sorrows, initially saw the outline of a familiar story. A young single mother, a recent split, a new babysitter, perhaps a misunderstanding, a tangled thread in a custody battle. But as they listened to the fractured accounts of Sarah and Jessica, their expressions hardened, shifting from procedural concern to the cold gleam of alarm. This was no domestic dispute. This was a tear in the fabric of reality. "Describe this, Ruth Johnson," Officer Martinez commanded, his pen hovering over the stark white page of his notepad. Jessica grappled for purchase on the slippery memory. Her clothes, they were so wrong, like from another time. It's been over 100 degrees today, but she wore long gloves, a scarf, a bonnet that hid all her hair. Sunglasses. I could hardly see her face at all. The officers exchanged a silent, knowing glance. "Could you identify her, if you were to see her again?" "I don't know. Perhaps, but it's unlikely. She was a figure made of shadows and cloth." Officer Thompson's attention pivoted to Sarah. "And this Ruth Johnson, you had met her in person prior to today?" "No," Sarah confessed, the word a brand of her own guilt. "She was meant to meet me at my job, but she was a no-show. Then she called, said her car had failed her, and I was so desperate for help, I put my faith in the sound of a stranger's voice." "And do you have a telephone number for her?" Sarah's heart collapsed. "No, she was always the one who called me. I never got her number." The officers commenced the grim, familiar ritual for a missing child. They scoured the apartment, a futile search for a child they knew wasn't hiding. They canvassed the neighbors, asking about a phantom woman and a toddler. They checked with management, only to find Spanish Gate kept no record of its ghosts. They placed a call to Michael, Jennifer's father, shattering the peace of his new apartment across town. His confusion bled into raw panic, an authentic terror that absolved him completely. He knew nothing of a woman named Ruth Johnson, and in minutes, he was in his car, driving into the heart of their shared, unfolding nightmare. As midnight's shadow crept across the city, The search spiraled outward, a desperate net cast over several square blocks that encircled the apartment complex. Officers rapped on doors as beams from their flashlights sliced through the gloom of alleys and dumpsters, sweeping through the silence of parks and playgrounds. The temperature had at last retreated to a semi-tolerable 85 degrees, yet the humidity clung to the air like a shroud, making each breath a heavy, labored thing. Sarah sat frozen on her apartment steps, a solitary island in a chaotic sea of neighbors offering help, policemen coordinating the search, and Jessica, whose apologies were lost in a flood of tears Sarah insisted were not hers to shed. Nearby, Michael carved a frantic path in the darkness, chain-smoking, his hands a storm of helpless frustration tearing through his hair. "We are going to find her," Officer Martinez vowed to Sarah, though a flicker of doubt in his eyes betrayed the words. Kids don't just dematerialize. Someone saw something. Someone holds a piece of the truth. We just have to find that person. But as the night bled away and brought forth no leads, a chilling reality settled over them like a winter frost. Jennifer Morrison, merely 21 months old, with hair like the earth and eyes like the sky, had been stolen away by a woman no one knew, a woman who wore a false name, who had cloaked her true appearance, who had orchestrated this vanishing act with enough precision to leave not even a whisper behind. By Tuesday morning, the call had been made to the FBI. The specter of a child taken across state lines fell squarely within federal reach. Special Agent Robert Chen entered the Fort Worth Police Department headquarters at 9 in the morning, carrying a heavy briefcase and a heavier reputation for solving the cases that were deemed impossible. For 3 unyielding hours, Agent Chen had Sarah navigate the labyrinth of her memory, dissecting every phone call with Ruth, every word that passed between them, every ghost of a sound in the background, every crack in the woman's carefully constructed story. Sarah plundered her own mind, replaying the conversations endlessly, but Ruth had been a phantom offering no landmarks, no details, nothing solid upon which an investigation could stand. The FBI's presence summoned resources the local police could not command. Within days, Jennifer's photograph was a silent plea sent to law enforcement agencies across Texas and its neighboring states. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram carved the headline onto its front page: "Toddler vanishes. After mother hires babysitter through classified ad." That evening, local news stations broadcast Sarah's tear-streaked face, her desperate appeal for her daughter's return. "Please," Sarah implored the cameras, her voice stripped raw by weeping. "If you have my baby, just bring her back. There will be no questions asked. I just want her home. Jennifer, if by some miracle you can hear Mama, I love you so much, and I am looking for you. I will never stop looking." The community's heart broke open, and the response was a tidal wave. Hundreds of volunteers appeared, forming search parties that combed through vacant lots, the dense woods along the Trinity River, the hollow skeletons of abandoned buildings, scouring every conceivable space within a 50-mile radius. Churches held vigils of flickering candles and whispered prayers. Local businesses offered sustenance to the search teams. A deluge of tips poured into the station, dozens a day at first, but each one proved to be a mirage. One tip, for a moment, burned bright with promise. A woman claimed to have seen someone matching Ruth's description at a bus station in Dallas, a 30-mile journey away, on the afternoon of August 23rd. FBI agents raced to chase this glimmer of hope, examining the meager security footage and questioning agents and passengers. But the lead dissolved like morning dew. No one at the station recalled selling a ticket to a woman with a toddler. The records were empty. It was another path to nowhere. The investigation was hindered by obstacles that seem quaint today, but were insurmountable fortresses in 1971. No unblinking cameras watched over the apartment parking lot. No digital eyes peered from doorbells. No cellular records existed to be traced. The classified ad had been paid for with anonymous cash mailed to the paper. Ruth's calls to Sarah had likely been made from the shelter of public payphones, leaving no number to follow. Every avenue of inquiry depended on the fragile, frustratingly unreliable tapestry of human memory. Agent Chen pursued the case with a relentless fire for 3 months, following every thread, no matter how thin. He came to believe Ruth Johnson was a woman haunted by her own loss, a child taken by miscarriage, stillbirth, or the courts, and had become desperate enough to claim another's. The psychology was sound, and the FBI reached out to hospitals, adoption agencies, and social services all over Texas, searching for women who fit this sorrowful profile and the vague physical description. They found several who seemed to fit. Interviews were conducted, alibis were scrutinized, but nothing held. Every potential suspect had an explanation, a witness, or a face that did not align with the fragmented image that lived in Jessica's memory. By December of 1971, the active search had fallen silent. The case file remained open, a wound that refused to heal, but with no new leads, there was nowhere left to search. Agent Chen returned to his other duties, though he kept Jennifer's file in his office, pulling it out in quiet moments, hoping some new perspective might leap from the page. It never did. For Sarah, life became a nightmare from which she could not awaken. She left her job at the diner, unable to hear an order over the screaming in her own mind. She spent her days at the police station, a constant presence pleading for updates that never came. She drove the streets of Fort Worth in her old car, her eyes scanning every woman with a toddler, every child in every yard, hoping against all reason that she might see Jennifer's face. The apartment itself became a suffocating prison of memory. Jennifer's crib still stood in the corner, her toys scattered as she had left them on that last morning. Sarah could not bear to put anything away. To do so felt like surrender, like admitting Jennifer was truly gone. Some nights, she would curl herself into the impossibly small space of the crib, clutching a stuffed rabbit, crying until the black wave of exhaustion finally claimed her. Michael tried to remain a fixture in the search, but his grief wore a different face. He buried himself in his work, staying late at the construction site, coming home too worn to feel. On weekends, he joined the search parties, walking grids through fields and woods, calling Jennifer's name into empty spaces that offered no reply. The marriage, already strained, became an impossibility. A tragedy of this magnitude will either forge two people into one or shatter them into pieces. For Sarah and Michael, it was the latter. By the spring of 1972, the final threads connecting them had frayed into nothing. They divorced quietly, two people annihilated by the same event, unable to save each other from the wreckage. Sarah eventually fled to a new apartment, unable to breathe the air at Spanish Gate, where every corner held a memory of that last morning. She took a new waitressing job and walked through the motions of being alive, but her soul was frozen in August of 1971, forever waiting for a babysitter who would never bring her daughter home. The years crawled by, each one an eternity. 1972 became 1973, then 1974. Each passing year felt like another shovelful of dirt on the grave of hope. Sarah remarried, had two more daughters, but Jennifer's absence was a ghost that haunted every moment of her motherhood. She would be playing with her younger girls, and a memory would strike like a physical blow. Jennifer's laugh, the way she said "Mama," the way she danced leaving Sarah breathless and reeling. She kept Jennifer's room perfectly preserved in every house she ever lived, in a shrine to a missing child, frozen in time at 21 months old. The stuffed rabbit sat on the bed. The tiny clothes hung in the closet. Every birthday, Sarah would buy a gift for the age Jennifer would have been, wrap it, and place it on the growing pile of unopened presents. Michael also remarried and had other children. He spoke of Jennifer less as time passed, not because his love had diminished, but because the pain was too colossal to carry into daily life. But he never forgot. On August 23rd of every year, he would take the day off from work and drive to Fort Worth, retracing the route from Sarah's old apartment to nowhere at all, just driving and remembering. The Fort Worth Police Department kept the case file active, but in reality, it was colder than the grave. New detectives inherited it as the old ones retired. Each would review the thin folder, a missing person report, witness statements, a few photographs, a litany of dead ends, and silently acknowledge that this was a story without a final chapter. The woman in the white gloves had planned too well, left too little, and vanished too completely. Be sure to subscribe if you want to follow this story into the light, because we are approaching the moment where the silence is finally broken. The 1980s brought a new kind of hope to old tragedies, as advances in forensic science promised that mysteries long thought buried could be resurrected. DNA profiling emerged, a revolutionary technique, though its use was still limited and costly. The FBI began to urge police departments to safeguard old evidence, strands of hair, clothing fibers, anything that might hold the secret language of genetics, in the hope that future technology could make it speak. A young detective named Andrew Patterson inherited Jennifer's case file in 1989. Fresh from the academy and assigned to the cold case division, Andrew approached it differently than his predecessors. He didn't just review the file, he walked back into the memory itself, returning to the Spanish Gate apartments, now looking more weathered and worn, and knocked on doors, seeking anyone who had lived there in 1971. Most of the original residents were long gone, but Andrew found 3 elderly people who had remained and who remembered the case. The details had been softened and blurred by 18 years, but the memory of Sarah's anguish and the frantic, all-consuming search remained sharp as glass. Everyone was talking about that babysitter in the strange get-up, one woman recalled. We all said she looked like she was deliberately hiding who she was, but the police never did find her. Andrew requested that any physical evidence Jennifer's clothing from that morning, anything the woman calling herself Ruth Johnson might have touched, be pulled from storage, but almost nothing had been kept. In 1971, DNA was not even a whisper in the world of criminal investigation. No one had thought to preserve such evidence, because no one could imagine it would ever have a story to tell. Still, Andrew gave the file a more complete life than it had ever known. He constructed a timeline, he mapped every location mentioned, he tracked down and re-interviewed every person connected to that day. He contacted Sarah, now living with her new family in a Dallas suburb, and gently asked her to walk through her memories one more time. "Do you believe you will find her?" Sarah's voice, a delicate filament of hope stretched thin across a chasm of years, queried him during one such interview. "In all honesty, I cannot say," Andrew confessed, the weight of the unknown heavy in his words. "But I give you my word, I will never cease my search. Your daughter is owed that much, and more." For 2 long years, Andrew wrestled with the specter of the case, but he, too, was ultimately dashed against the same silent, unyielding wall that had broken every investigator before him. Without a trace of physical evidence, without a single soul to bear witness, without so much as a whisper of a trail to follow, the case lay dormant, a sleeping giant. In 1991, a promotion pulled Andrew from the cold archives into the searing heat of active homicide, and Jennifer's file was once again consigned to the shadows, awaiting the next soul brave enough to challenge the impossible. The 1990s and 2000s unfurled, bringing with them a tide of technological marvels in DNA and databases for the lost. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, born in 1984, became a lighthouse, a centralized beacon for tracking and bringing home the vanished. Age progression software breathed a ghostly life into the unknown, allowing forensic artists to sculpt images from time itself, showing what Jennifer might have become. Sarah received these phantoms every few years. Jennifer at 10, then 15, at 20, at 30, and each likeness was both a sacred relic and an instrument of exquisite torment. Sarah scattered these spectral portraits across the world, wherever a surface would hold them. She wove a digital sanctuary, a website she called Find Jennifer Morrison, in the early 2000s. A time when such a creation demanded a true communion with the arcane language of HTML and a will of iron. The site became a testament, holding every shard of the case, Jennifer's cherubic baby picture, the haunting age progressions, a mother's unending plea for a sign, and the coordinates to Sarah's own waiting heart. The digital shrine drew sporadic pilgrims, mostly acolytes of true crime and amateur hunters of shadows. Whispers of tips would drift in a woman bearing the face from the progression seen in the deserts of Nevada, another potential echo spotted in the mists of Oregon. With every whisper, Sarah would galvanize the local constabulary, her voice a torrent of information, her follow-ups a relentless vigil. Each lead was pursued down its rabbit hole. None ever led to the light. All the while, a quiet revolution was simmering in the crucibles of consumer genetics, a force that would one day shatter the silence. Titans like 23 and Me and Ancestry. Calm rose in the mid-2000s, offering the public a key to their own biological code for the price of a mailed-in vial of saliva. For this small offering, one could receive the grand tapestry of their ethnic origins, warnings of potential frailties in their flesh, and most fatefully connections to the lost branches of their own family tree, who had also sought answers in their DNA. At first, this new sorcery seemed a world away from the cold, dusty file of Jennifer Morrison. There was no genetic ghost to test, no thread to link her to these burgeoning digital webs of kinship. But the databases grew, swelling like a silent ocean. Millions upon millions, across the globe, cast their genetic information into this sea, creating an unprecedented atlas of interconnected bloodlines and biological truths. By the year 2020, the number of souls who had mapped their DNA had crested 30 million. Genealogists, the new detectives of the modern age, had begun to wield these databases as a weapon against the past, tracing the shadows of killers back from a single drop of blood to the family trees that unwittingly sheltered them. This very technique, christened genetic genealogy, had already dragged monsters from the darkness, including the infamous Golden State Killer. Sarah, now a woman in her early 70s, had never forsaken her quest, though her tools had sharpened with the turning of the world. Her Facebook page, a digital vigil named Finding Jennifer Morrison, was followed by thousands. She tended to it faithfully, posting sun-drenched memories of Jennifer, broadcasting the rare tremor of an update on the case, and championing the causes of other lost children. The true crime community had taken up her torch, sharing her words and keeping Jennifer's story breathing in the ether of the digital world. Sarah's two younger daughters, Amanda and Rebecca, had come of age in the long shadow of the sister they never knew. Their childhood was steeped in the legend of Jennifer. They lived beside her perfectly preserved, shrine-like bedroom, and they understood that a piece of their mother's soul would forever remain anchored in the sweltering August of 1971. Both daughters harbored a complex knot of feelings for this phantom sibling. How does one grieve a person who is only a story, while vying with her ghost for a mother's fractured attention? But in the year 2022, Rebecca resolved to take a step that would, against all odds, finally fracture the case's 51-year wall of silence. She was adrift in the blue light of Facebook one early November evening, the familiar ache of her mother's post about the approaching anniversary settling in her chest, when a flicker of an advertisement snared her gaze. 23andMe was holding a holiday sale, offering their DNA testing kits like keys to a forgotten kingdom. A flicker of curiosity had always lived in Rebecca, a desire to read the stories written in her own genes, to learn of her ancient lineage and the secrets her body might hold. But as she stared at the ad, another thought, wild and electric, struck her like lightning. What if Jennifer had tested her DNA? What if, by some impossible miracle, she was alive out there and had sought her own reflection in one of these services? The odds were a universe against it, a whisper in a hurricane, but after a lifetime of silence, what was there left to lose? Rebecca summoned the testing kits, one for herself, one for her sister Amanda, and she gently convinced her mother, Sarah, to partake in the ritual as well. When the small boxes arrived, they each offered up a sample of themselves, a prayer sealed in a vial, and sent them back to the laboratory. And then, the waiting began a span of 6 to 8 weeks, a mere breath in time to a family that had already waited 51 years. What was another turn of the moon? The vials were sent into the world in the heart of November 2022. The first echoes returned in the nascent days of January 2023. Rebecca's results arrived first, a sprawling map of her European ancestry, a few curious whispers about her health, and a constellation of DNA matches. Most were distant stars, cousins she'd never known, people sharing a mere 1 or 2% of her genetic script through ancestors lost to time. She was drifting through this galaxy of distant kin, a list of names without faces, when a single entry seized her, freezing the blood in her veins. There, in her list of close relatives, a line blazed. Close family, sibling. The data was stark, irrefutable. They shared approximately 50% of their DNA. Rebecca felt a frantic drumming begin in her chest, a wild, panicked rhythm. She had only one full sibling, Amanda, whose results were still pending. But this match was not Amanda. The profile bore the name Melissa A. Rebecca's hands trembled as she clicked, her finger hovering over the name. The profile was a ghost, a sketch scant information. No story, just a first name and the detail that she was born in Texas. In a heartbeat, Rebecca was calling Amanda, the words spilling from her, a frantic, breathless cascade that barely formed a coherent thought. I have another sibling match, she stammered. It's not you, it's someone else, someone who shares half of my DNA. That can't be possible, Amanda's voice came back, laced with disbelief. Are you sure it's not a mistake? Maybe Dad had another child we never knew about. But even as the words left Amanda's lips, a deeper, colder truth settled over them both. Their father, Michael, had remarried, but his family had grown no larger. This connection wasn't through him, it was through Sarah. And Sarah had borne only 3 daughters. Jennifer, who had dissolved into thin air at 21 months old, and Amanda and Rebecca, both present, both accounted for, unless Jennifer hadn't vanished, unless, against all hope and all reason, she had been living a life, somewhere, all this time. Rebecca dialed her mother, her fingers fumbling, her voice a stranger in her own throat. "Mom, you need to be sitting down. I got my DNA results. There's a match, a sibling. Her name is Melissa, and she's in Texas." The silence that answered stretched into an eternity so profound that Rebecca feared the line had gone dead. Then, a voice emerged from the quiet, her mother's voice, small and fractured, and shimmering with a hope so terrifying that it made Rebecca's heart ache, for she knew what a cruel thing hope had been to her mother for so many decades. "Is it her?" she whispered. "Could it truly be her?" "I don't know, Mom," Rebecca answered, her own voice finding a sudden, steely resolve. "But I'm going to find out." The profile for Melissa A. offered a single, fragile bridge, a messaging portal through the 23andMe platform. Rebecca spent an hour wrestling with ghosts and possibilities, composing and deleting, searching for a language that did not exist for a moment such as this. There was no script, no precedent. In the end, she could only offer the unvarnished, impossible truth. "Hello, Melissa. My name is Rebecca Morrison. According to 23andMe, we are sisters, full siblings, sharing nearly 50% of our DNA. This will sound impossible, but I believe you may be my sister, Jennifer, who was taken from our family in Fort Worth, Texas, in August of 1971. If you were adopted, or if there is any mystery surrounding your birth, I am begging you to contact me. Our family has been searching for you for 51 years. Rebecca pressed send, and a wave of nausea washed over her. What if this was all some cruel glitch in the system? What if she had just shattered a stranger's world with this madness? What if it was Jennifer, but a Jennifer who had no desire to be found? The questions spiraled, a vortex of what-ifs. For the remainder of the day, she was a captive to her screen, checking for a reply every 5 minutes. Nothing. As evening bled into night, she surrendered to the cold certainty that it was another false dawn, another ghost in a long line of ghosts for a family that had known too many. She slept that night with her phone on the pillow beside her head, a sentinel with its volume turned to the heavens, just in case. At 3:47 in the morning, in the deepest hour of the night, her phone chimed. A new message. From Melissa A. "Words are failing me. My hands tremble as I pen this. I was told my whole life that I was adopted, but my parents, the very people who raised me, always said it was a private affair, shrouded in ambiguity. I was born in 1970, and my entire existence has been rooted in Texas, mostly within the orbit of Fort Worth. I possess no adoption papers, and whenever I dared to ask questions as a child, the answers were like mist. Could you tell me more of your sister, Jennifer? What was the light in her eyes like?" Rebecca, without a moment's hesitation, sent a cascade of images back through the digital ether. Jennifer, as an infant, the haunting age progressions sculpted by time and technology, photographs of a young Sarah. Then, she sat cloistered in the shadows of her bedroom, her phone a solitary beacon, and waited. The reply arrived, with an electric swiftness this time. "Oh my God, that age progression. That is my face. That is my face staring back at me. I think I need to hear your voice." For 4 hours that first night, they spoke, a river of words flowing between two sisters cleaved apart by 51 years and a handful of miles, each trying to assemble a truth too staggering to be real. Melissa, who had worn that name her entire life, never dreaming it was not her own, painted a picture of her childhood. She had blossomed in a small house in Haltom City, a quiet suburb just beyond the edge of Fort Worth, less than 10 miles from the Spanish Gate apartments. The woman who had raised her, who had claimed the title of mother, was already in her 40s when Melissa appeared in her life. A father was a ghost in the narrative, a man who drifted in and out of view, but never anchored himself. The story woven for Melissa was one of a private adoption through a church, a tale of a birth mother too young to bear the weight of a child. But there were never any papers, Melissa confessed, her voice fracturing with the weight of unspoken years. Whenever I asked to see them, a new excuse would materialize. They were swallowed by a move, buried in storage, or held by a lawyer whose office had long since vanished. When I turned 18, I sought out my birth certificate, but the one I found felt like a forgery against my own soul. The dates were a discordant note against the melody I'd been taught. "And the woman who raised you?" Rebecca asked. Her voice hushed. "What became of her?" "She passed away in 2015. Cancer took her." Before the end, I pleaded with her one final time for the truth of my adoption. She only said that I had been loved, that I had been wanted, and that was the only truth that mattered. But I always felt a silence in her words, a story she was keeping locked away. As the first blush of dawn spilled over that November morning, a plan began to form between Rebecca and Melissa. They would bring Sarah into the light. They would reach out to the Fort Worth Police Department, and they would seek the irrefutable truth etched in DNA, if any of Jennifer's had been saved from the ravages of time. But first, they had to stand in the same room and breathe the same air. They chose a coffee shop in Fort Worth. 2 days later, Rebecca came with Amanda and Sarah. For 48 hours, Sarah had been a ghost in her own home, sleep and food and stillness, all strangers to her. She had waited 51 years for this sliver of a chance, and now that it was upon her, a profound terror seized her. What if the science was flawed? What if it was Jennifer, but she looked upon Sarah with hatred for a failure to protect her? What if this was all a cruel mirage, and the daughter she'd finally found had already been lost to the world years ago? If this story has its hooks in you, press the like button, because the next chapter of this tale is a descent into utter madness. Rebecca was the first to arrive, securing a corner booth that offered a sanctuary of privacy. Amanda settled beside her, 2 pairs of sisters' eyes fixed upon the door. Sarah remained standing by the entrance, a sentinel unable to rest, her hands trembling with such a violent tremor that Rebecca feared she might shatter. At precisely 2 p.m., a woman stepped across the threshold. She was in her early 50s, her brown hair threaded with the first whispers of silver, her eyes a familiar shade of blue, and a face that made Sarah's heart stop beating. The architecture of her bones had changed. 51 years of life had carved new lines. The age progressions could never have foreseen but the eyes. The eyes were the very same ones that had looked up at Sarah from a cradle on that long-ago August morning. "Jennifer?" Sarah breathed. A name she had whispered 1,000,000 times into the darkness, a prayer woven from tears and desperate, hollow nights. The woman's eyes welled, blurring the world around them. I think that's me. I think I am Jennifer. But my whole life, I've been Melissa. I don't know who I am anymore." They fell into one another's arms, 2 strangers fused by blood and stolen time, their sobs echoing in the quiet hum of a Fort Worth coffee shop as the world pretended not to watch. Amanda and Rebecca closed in, forming a circle of women bound by a shared loss, an impossible discovery, and the staggering reality of being whole after half a century of being broken. They spoke for hours, the coffee in their cups growing cold and forgotten. Melissa unspooled the tapestry of her life, a working-class upbringing, a struggle through school, a young marriage that gave her 3 children. Now grown, she had moved through a series of jobs and now managed a small retail store. Her life had been a study in the ordinary, except for the persistent, nagging feeling that the first chapter of her story was a lie. "I always felt a part," Melissa admitted, "like a vital piece of me was missing, you understand. I would see mothers and daughters with the same eyes, the same gestures, and I would wonder, from what earth did I grow? The woman who raised me, I loved her, truly, but we were from different worlds, different spirits, different hearts, different everything." Sarah listened, a silent storm of tears tracing paths down her face, trying to bridge the chasm between the infant she lost and this middle-aged woman who had lived an entire life just beyond her reach. 51 years. Jennifer had been living 51 years just miles away. She had attended schools Sarah might have passed, shopped in stores Sarah might have entered, a ghost living in the same city while a nation was searched for her. "I drove past your house," Sarah said, the words escaping in a sudden, choked gasp. "In 2010, I was a home health aide. One of my patients was in Haltom City. I must have driven down your street dozens of times. You were right there." The cruelty of it was a physical blow. All those years of searching, all the false hopes in faraway states, and Jennifer had never even left Fort Worth. The woman in the white gloves had not vanished across the country or hidden in some desolate corner of the world. She had simply driven a few miles down the road and raised a stolen child as her own, hiding in the open for 5 decades. But emotion was not evidence. DNA matches from commercial kits were a beacon, but for the cold, hard lines of the law for closure, for death certificates to be unwritten, and legal identities to be reclaimed, they needed the official seal of verification. Rebecca placed a call to the Fort Worth Police Department, her voice steady as she asked to speak to someone about the Jennifer Morrison case. The dispatcher was initially perplexed. It was a 51-year-old cold case, a fossil in their records, but when Rebecca explained that they believed they had found Jennifer alive through a DNA test, the gears of justice began to grind with a sudden, ferocious speed. Detective Lisa Chen, who had become the reluctant custodian of the cold case files 5 years prior, took the call and immediately unearthed Jennifer's file. She had read it countless times, even scribbled notes about the potential of genetic genealogy, should any testable DNA ever surface. But like every detective before her, she had resigned herself to the belief that the case was a ghost, unsolvable without a miracle. And now, here was Rebecca Morrison on the phone, claiming they had performed that miracle themselves with a kit bought online. Detective Chen scheduled a meeting for the following day. A shockwave went through the Fort Worth Police Department, especially its cold case division. The Jennifer Morrison case was the stuff of departmental legend. The infant snatched from a hospital in 1971, the phantom woman in white gloves who had dissolved into thin air. Every detective who had ever touched that file had been haunted by the question of what became of that little girl. Now, they were on the precipice of an answer. Detective Chen immersed herself in the file before the meeting. The physical evidence was scant faded photographs, witness statements yellowed with age, brittle police reports. But she unearthed a detail of monumental importance. Back in 1989, a detective named Andrew Patterson had possessed the foresight to order that hair samples from Jennifer's own baby brush be preserved, banking on a future where science could unlock the secrets they held. Those samples still existed, sealed in an evidence locker within a climate-controlled facility. They had been waiting there for 34 years, dormant, waiting for this very day, this very reason, to be brought into the light. The meeting at the police station felt like a dream. Sarah, Rebecca, Amanda, and Melissa gathered in a sterile conference room as Detective Chen outlined the path to verification. An official DNA test was required, a comparison between Melissa's genetic code and the DNA sleeping in the preserved hairs from Jennifer's brush, alongside a test of Sarah's DNA to confirm the unbreakable maternal link. "How long?" Sarah asked, her voice stretched taut with a lifetime of waiting. "Will it take?" "The standard protocol is a slow burn, taking several weeks," Detective Chen explained, her tone measured. "But this case is a ghost that has haunted us for too long. I'm forcing it through. We're hoping for answers in under 2 weeks' time." Those 2 weeks stretched into an eternity, a chasm of time more vast than the 51 years that had preceded them. Melissa drifted through her life, a phantom in her own home, while the very architecture of her identity crumbled and reformed in the crucible of uncertainty. For 52 years, the name Melissa had been her skin. How does one suddenly inhabit the ghost of a name Jennifer? How does the soul reconcile that its foundation was a crime, that the woman who was the sun of your childhood universe had, in fact, stolen you from your own sky? Her mind drifted to the architect of her stolen life, the woman she now saw as a specter in white gloves, the enigma who called herself Ruth Johnson, a name that was just another layer of the lie. She had been a woman of sharp edges and stern rules, never cruel, but a desert where affection should have bloomed. There was a love there, or a shadow of it, a hollow echo across a chasm Melissa could never cross. Was it love that had bound them? Or was she merely a stolen relic, a living effigy meant to fill the void of a loss she could never comprehend? The questions spun into a dizzying vortex, each one a key, unlocking yet another chamber of sorrow and bewilderment. The answer arrived on the 1st of December, in the year 2022. It was Detective Chen who made the call, a personal harbinger of truth to Sarah, though that truth had already whispered itself into their hearts. The home test had been a premonition, but the official word, that was a hammer blow of certainty, a weight that speculation could never bear. "The match is absolute." Detective Chen's voice was heavy, freighted with the emotion of a half-century of waiting. "Melissa is Jennifer. Your daughter lives, Sarah. After 51 years, the ghost has come home." The receiver slipped from Sarah's grasp as her body gave way, a torrent of sobs racking her, a storm of relief and grief, of joy and sorrow, a Gordian knot of feeling impossible to untangle. Her child was alive. Her child had been a mere 10 miles away, a star hidden just beyond the horizon. Her baby was now a 52-year-old woman, a stranger named Melissa, who had navigated an entire existence in a world without her. Within days, the story erupted, a wildfire of news that swept the nation. The ghost of 1971, kidnapped baby, found alive after 51 years. The headlines screamed, each a variation on a theme of disbelief. It was a modern myth, a tale too fantastical for reality, yet one etched in the undeniable truth of science. The press descended upon Fort Worth, a ravenous swarm drawn to the scent of a miracle. Every major network clamored for a piece of their story. Sarah, Rebecca, Amanda, and Melissa offered carefully chosen glimpses into their world, but mostly they retreated, seeking sanctuary from the storm as they learned to navigate the treacherous currents of their new reality. But what of justice in a story where the villain has already left the stage? Let us know your thoughts below, for we now turn to the shadow that cast this long darkness, the woman who stole Jennifer. The path to justice, however, was a labyrinth with no exit. The architect of this half-century, a woman finally unmasked, as Patricia Williams had vanished into the ultimate silence, dying in 2015, 7 years before her great deception was unearthed. She had carried her secrets to the grave, a final, silent act of defiance, leaving behind no confession, no remorse, and denying her victim the catharsis of confrontation. In 1971, Patricia Williams was a spectre in plain sight. 43 years old, unmarried, a secretary moving invisibly through the corridors of Fort Worth. As investigators stitched together the frayed tapestry of her past, they found the wound, a stillborn daughter, in 1969, just 2 years before the theft. A theory bloomed in the darkness that Patricia, shattered by a grief she could not bury, set out to replace a ghost with a living child. Her plan was a masterpiece of cold precision. The newspaper ad was the lure, dangling hope to find its victim. The disembodied voices from scattered payphones were her probes, testing the waters, assessing the terrain. The feigned absence was a cruel instrument to measure a mother's desperation. The disguise, a veil to render her invisible. She had considered every shadow, every contingency. And after the abduction, Patricia simply vanished into the mundane. She retreated to a small house in Haltom City, weaving a simple, believable fiction of a private adoption for the curious ears of neighbors. She raised Jennifer as Melissa, and the world simply accepted it. In the hazy days of 1971, before the digital eye saw all, such stories were commonplace. Paperwork was a whisper, and neighbors kept their questions behind closed doors. She stripped Jennifer of her name, bestowing Melissa upon her like a shroud, and authored a new history from thin air. With forged papers, she built a scaffold of legitimacy enough to enter a school, to see a doctor, to exist. It was a life built on paper and lies, a feat that seems impossible now, but in the analog heart of old America, it was terrifyingly simple. The Fort Worth police searched for accomplices, for any crack in the facade that might reveal another soul complicit in the crime. But the evidence pointed to a solitary darkness. Patricia had acted alone, a keeper of a secret so profound it was never shared. Even the man who drifted through Melissa's youth like a phantom father swore he knew only the story of adoption, blind to the abyss beneath the surface. But with Patricia beyond the reach of the law, the scales of justice remained unbalanced. There would be no day in court, no reckoning, no moment for a stolen child to face her captor. Patricia had slipped through their fingers, claimed by a quiet death from cancer, her fortress of lies unbreached even at the end. This hollow end left a bitter taste, a profound frustration for all who had been touched by the crime. Sarah yearned for retribution, for a price to be paid for the stolen years. Melissa craved the one thing she could never have, an answer to the consuming why. But the dead keep their counsel, and the earth offers no confessions. Yet, amidst the ashes of legal justice, a different kind of restoration began. Melissa had to reclaim the name that was her birthright. In the May of 2023, she stood before a judge in Tarrant County, Texas, petitioning to resurrect the name Jennifer Melissa Morrison, keeping Melissa as a bridge to the past, a name that, after 52 years, was woven into the fabric of her soul. The courtroom was a silent theater, filled with family, with the watchful eyes of the press, and with strangers drawn by the gravity of the story. At the bench sat a judge in her 60s, a woman whose stoicism had been broken by the tale in the case file, and with a voice thick with unspoken emotion, she called the hearing to order. In 3 decades upon this bench, I have never witnessed a story so profound, the judge began, her gaze fixed on Jennifer. Miss Williams, or, as you should have always been known, Miss Morrison, a life was stolen from you, an identity denied for 51 years. Yet here you stand, a testament to unwavering love and the relentless power of truth. It is my solemn honor to grant this petition. The gavel fell, a sharp crack that shattered 52 years of falsehood. Jennifer Melissa Morrison was reborn. A wave of applause washed over the room as Sarah embraced her daughter, their tears and smiles mingling in a beautiful, complicated tapestry. 2 strangers learning the forgotten language of mother and child. But the echoes of the gavel's fall marked not an end, but a beginning, the start of a reconstruction that was as fragile as it was profound. Jennifer's 3 adult children now faced the revelation that their grandmother was a phantom and their mother's life a carefully constructed lie. Sarah's other daughters, who had spent their lives in the shadow of a ghost, now had to make room for her flesh and blood return. And Jennifer herself stood at a crossroads, forced to reconcile love for the woman who raised her with the horror of her crime. Therapy became their sanctuary, a place to excavate the tangled roots of trauma, confusion, and grief. They went alone and as a fractured whole, guided by a specialist in the labyrinth of identity, who confessed that even in her world of broken histories, their story was a mapless territory. There is no chart for these waters, the therapist told them, her voice a gentle anchor in the storm. You are the cartographers of your own healing. You must grant yourselves grace for the journey. And the journey was arduous. Jennifer felt a love for Sarah, but the role of daughter was a foreign language. Sarah yearned to rewind the clock, but 51 years could not be unwritten. Amanda and Rebecca reached for a sister, only to grapple with the thorns of an old jealousy. They were all striving, but their best efforts were caught in the tangled wreckage of the past. Pass this story on to those who are drawn to the deep mysteries of the human heart. For the path this family chose to forge from the ruins is a testament to the resilience of love. Despite the treacherous emotional landscape, they committed to building a new world together, brick by painful brick. Weekly dinners became their ritual, a rotating sanctuary. They began weaving new traditions, sacred threads to bind them, while mourning the ghost of those they'd lost. They spoke the truth of the strangeness, refusing to paper over the cracks with platitudes. Jennifer returned to the place of her genesis and her abduction, but Spanish Gate was gone, erased from the earth, and replaced by the sterile anonymity of a strip mall. She stood on the haunted ground where she had spent the first 21 months of her life, searching for an echo, a whisper of connection to a past she could not recall. But there was only silence. The child she had been was a stranger to her now. They also sought out the final resting place of Patricia Williams. Jennifer needed to see the stone, to feel the finality of her captor's end, a place to anchor the swirling tempest of her feelings. The epitaph was a simple, chilling statement. Patricia Williams, 1920, 8 to 2015. At peace, are you? Jennifer, divided by Melissa, whispered to the cold stone. Truly at peace, for you left a maelstrom in your wake. Sarah stood beside her, her gaze fixed upon the name etched in granite. The name of the woman who had shattered her world, stolen her child, and walked free for 44 years, only to die peacefully in her sleep. A tempest of rage should have been tearing through her, a primal urge to desecrate this hollow ground, to find some violent, dramatic release. But all that remained was a profound weariness. She is gone, Sarah murmured, the words barely disturbing the air. The harm she can do is over. Let us go home. Their story, however, was far from over. It spiraled into a new chapter when the family chose to become a beacon for others, lost in the same fog of uncertainty. They forged a digital sanctuary, a Facebook page titled DNA Wins, Finding Missing Family, a guide for those navigating the labyrinth of genetic genealogy and the ghosts of cold cases. The response was a deluge. Hundreds of voices, long silenced by grief, reached out, weaving tales of vanished children, of absent siblings, of parents lost to time. Some quests were decades old, etched with the pain of a lifetime. Others were just beginning their sorrowful journey, yet all were bound by a single, desperate prayer, for a reunion to eclipse their tragedy, just as the Morrisons had found. Jennifer, divided by Melissa, found a fierce new purpose in guiding adoptees through the shadows of their own origins. For she now understood that not all beginnings are born of love, that sometimes the word adoption is merely a veil for a much darker truth. She became a cartographer of bloodlines, helping others chart the complex maps of DNA, decipher the cryptic language of their results, and raise the branches of family trees to find the faces of the unknown. Sarah, now in the winter of her mid-70s, discovered a new dawn in this crusade. She lent her voice to interviews, stood before crowds at conferences on the lost, and became the very embodiment of unyielding hope. Her creed was simple, yet profound. Believe in the truths science can uncover, trust the whispers of your own heart, and never cease the search, no matter how deep the night may seem. For 51 years, the world told me Jennifer was a ghost, Sarah recounted in one interview. They urged me to accept it, to move on, to extinguish the false hope that was consuming me. But I never surrendered. I never stopped believing she was out there, somewhere. And she was. She was right there, all along. Their advocacy became a key, unlocking 3 other cold cases in the year 2023 alone. A woman who had searched for her brother for 3 decades finally found him. A ghost in the genetic code the Morrisons helped her read. An adoptee unearthed the truth. Her mother, a teenager in the 1960s, had been fed the cruel lie that her child had perished at birth. A man discovered the sister he'd mourned was alive, stolen by their own father in a bitter custody war, and raised as a stranger in a different state. Every reunion was a testament, affirming their conviction that their own fractured history, as agonizing as it was, could be remade into a vessel of purpose. They had been granted an impossible miracle, Jennifer, returned from the void after 51 years, and they were resolved to share that light. The glare of the media illuminated the deep chasms in missing person investigations, especially for cases buried in the pre-digital twilight. Thousands had vanished in the 1960s and 70s, their stories gathering dust in the metal tombs of police basements. How many still drew breath? How many lived veiled in new names, phantoms to their own pasts? In response, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children forged a new initiative, a focused effort to wield genetic genealogy as a torch against the darkness of cold cases. Police departments across the nation began to form specialized units, artisans of DNA analysis, and genealogical craft. Even consumer DNA companies started to bridge the gap with law enforcement, navigating the delicate balance between solving mysteries and safeguarding secrets. Let the whispers of other stories reach me in the comments. Tell me which case calls to you next, and share if you, too, have ever used the science of DNA to unlock a secret kept by blood. By 2024, the Morrison family had found their footing in a new reality, one both strange and strangely beautiful. They gathered for holidays, a delicate negotiation of histories, as they wove together traditions from Jennifer, divided by Melissa's 52 years of a life lived elsewhere. They even journeyed to the shores of Florida, a pilgrimage they could never make while Jennifer was lost, for Sarah had remained a steadfast sentinel in Fort Worth, always waiting for her daughter's return. Jennifer, divided by Melissa's 3 children, welcomed this sudden bloom of extended family, yet they wrestled with the ghost of Patricia Williams. She was the grandmother who had witnessed their births, who had baked them cookies and offered a fractured kind of love. But she was also the thief who had stolen their mother's life and left a wound on a family's soul. How does one hold 2 such opposing truths in a single heart? I believe a person can be a mosaic of light and shadow. Ashley, Jennifer, divided by Melissa's daughter, offered during a family therapy session. What Grandma Patricia did was a terrible thing, perhaps unforgivable. But she also raised my mother. She kept her from harm. She gave her a life. It was not the life she was meant for, but it was a life nonetheless. I can despise the act, and still cherish memories of the person that are not tainted by that darkness. This layered understanding became the compass that guided them forward. Patricia Williams was remade in their memory not as a monster, but as a cautionary tale, a testament to how desperation can twist a grieving soul toward terrible deeds, and a somber reminder that the human heart is a complex vessel, capable of holding both profound harm and true affection. The story's echoes continued to reverberate through the public consciousness. It became fodder for podcasts, a puzzle for YouTube's true crime analysts, and a storm of debate on Reddit threads, dissecting the intricate ethics and emotions. While most marveled at the impossible reunion, a current of doubt ran beneath the surface, questioning if Jennifer, divided by Melissa, even wished to be found, or if Sarah had the right to shatter a life that had been built in her absence. Jennifer, divided by Melissa, confronted these whispers head-on in an interview. People wonder if I'm angry with my sisters for finding me, as if they shattered my world. But the truth is, I always sensed a disconnect. I lived with the feeling that a piece of my story was missing. And yes, the truth was a seismic shock. It turned my world on its axis. But I deserved that truth. Every soul on this earth deserves to know the bedrock of who they are. Inevitably, the cruel question of regret was laid at Sarah's feet. Did she regret the classified ad, the disembodied voice on the telephone, the act of faith that placed her daughter in a stranger's arms? Of course, I have regrets, Sarah answered, her voice a calm sea over depths of sorrow. I have carried regret and guilt for 51 years, but I was doing the best I knew how, with what little I had. A young, single mother fighting to stay afloat. I did not make a bad choice. A choice was made to steal my child from me. That weight belongs to Patricia, not to me. It took me decades to see that truth, but I see it now. This powerful refusal to carry another's sin resonated deeply with other parents who had walked through fire. Sarah became a voice for the grace of self-forgiveness, a testament that tragedy can befall good people making the only decisions they can, and a beacon for those refusing to let trauma be the final author of their story. By the close of 2024, nearly 2 years after the reunion, the family had found its own unique cadence. They were not a conventional family. Too many years had been stolen, too much trauma etched into their bones, too many separate worlds forged to ever truly fuse into one. But they were family. Unequivocally, they appeared for one another. They wove new memories into the tapestry of their lives. They honored the ghosts of what was lost, while fiercely embracing all that had been found. Jennifer, divided by Melissa, remained anchored to her life, keeping her retail management job and finding solace in the steady rhythm of the everyday. Yet she also journeyed into the world of genetic genealogy, earning a certification to guide others through the mists of their own origins. Her own life as the one who was lost, the one whose story was a secret, even to herself, gave her an unparalleled empathy for these delicate searches. Sarah, in turn, laid down the tools of her home health aid job, dedicating herself completely to the cause that now defined her. She became a traveler for the lost, speaking at conferences, consulting with police departments, and tending to the digital hearth of their Facebook page. The singular purpose that had fueled her for decades finding Jennifer had now blossomed, its light reaching out to embrace all the others still waiting in the dark. Amanda and Rebecca, while tending to the gardens of their own lives, remained deeply rooted in this new family dynamic. The early storms of jealousy and confusion had passed, leaving behind the clear, quiet air of true sisterhood. They connected through screens, the three sisters, a constellation reformed, fiercely guarding the precious time they had left against the shadow of all the time that was stolen. The official chapter closed in March of 2024, as the Fort Worth Police Department stood before the press and declared the kidnapping of Jennifer Morrison solved. The mystery, unraveled by consumer DNA, had ended not in sorrow, but with Jennifer alive, well, and restored to her family. Detective Lisa Chen spoke, her words a tribute to the family's relentless spirit and a herald for the new dawn that genetic genealogy was bringing to the ghosts of cold cases. This case is a testament to the idea that it is never too late, Detective Chen declared. 51 years is an eternity. Most would have surrendered to the silence, but this family never did, and their faith was rewarded in the most profound way imaginable. It is our hope that this will be a beacon for other families, inspiring them to continue their search, to use every tool at their disposal, and to never, ever lose faith that answers can be found. That press conference marked the family's final bow on the public stage. They had shared their story, ignited vital conversations that echoed across the nation, and lit a candle of hope for countless others. Now, they sought the quiet sanctuary of their own lives, a world beyond the glare of cameras and the endless cascade of questions. Yet Sarah granted one last interview, in the fading light of December 2024, on the day that marked the 54th anniversary of the void Jennifer had left. The reporter posed a final question. What wisdom could she offer to the other parents, still lost in that same nightmare, the one she had inhabited for 5 long decades? Sarah weighed her words before she spoke. First, you must never surrender hope. I know that is said often, but I mean that in its most absolute sense. Never cease the search. Never abandon belief. Never accept the silence as the final answer. Second, you must marshal every resource at your command. DNA, The vast web of social media, private detectives, even the whispers of psychics, if they bring you solace, use everything. You never know which key will fit the lock. Third, you must preserve yourself. I nearly became a ghost, consumed by grief and the shadows of what if. I lost years with my other daughters, adrift in the singular obsession of finding Jennifer. Do not repeat my mistake. You can hunt for the lost and still inhabit your own life. You must live. She paused, her gaze drifting to a landscape of memory. And fourth, believe that the truth itself yearns for the light. For 51 years, a truth lay dormant, shrouded in darkness, but it was always there, waiting. The helix of DNA speaks an unwavering truth. The bonds of blood exist, whether we acknowledge them or not. Sometimes, the truth simply awaits the right instrument to bring it into the light. For us, that instrument was a $99 test of our very essence, and a daughter who refused to be silenced by the story she was given. That was all it took to shatter a 51-year-old silence. So never doubt the power of what we can discover, and never underestimate your own power to find the answers you seek. The interview concluded with Sarah's gaze piercing the lens, her voice a beacon to an unseen legion of families with loved ones lost to the ether. They are out there, she said, her voice an anchor. Continue the search. Hold fast to belief. The blood will tell. It will win. It brought our family back from the brink, and it can help bring yours home too. Let us know in the comments from which corner of the country you are watching, and tell me if this story resonated in your soul as deeply as it did in mine. As the year 2025 dawned, the Morrison family's saga began to shift from the stark geography of a kidnapping to the delicate landscape of healing. They had been granted their miracle, Jennifer found alive after 5 decades, but miracles do not erase the scars. They still faced the painstaking work of weaving new bonds, of reckoning with the trauma, and of learning the forgotten language of family, a language whose foundation had been shattered and rebuilt time and again. They celebrated Jennifer, divided by Melissa's 54th birthday in March of 2025, the first time she had marked her birth with the family of her blood since she was but 21 months old. Sarah baked a cake in Jennifer, divided by Melissa's favorite flavor, a detail Sarah had to learn, a small testament to the 53 birthdays lost to the silence. They lit the candles, sang the familiar hymn of happy birthday, and captured photographs that would have seemed a fever dream just 3 years prior. Gazing upon those photographs, witnessing the tapestry of 4 generations of Morrison women woven together, you would never divine the maelstrom of pain and chaos that had carried them to this moment. They appeared as any other family in celebration, their faces alight with smiles and laughter, a portrait of normalcy. But their normal was a thing forged in fire. Normal was a covenant they renewed with every sunrise, to stand together in the strangeness, to build something new from the wreckage of what was stolen. The saga of Jennifer Morrison, or was it Melissa, or perhaps Jennifer Melissa Morrison, for she was a ghost of all those names, and the substance of none, ascended into the realm of true crime legend. It was the case that whispered a new truth, that the impossible is merely temporary, that the coldest of cases could thaw no matter how many decades had fallen away, that a family could endure the most profound of losses and emerge from the other side, altered but whole. People would ask Jennifer, divided by Melissa, whether a tempest of anger raged within her, over the stolen tapestry of her childhood, over the relationship with her mother that could never be fully reclaimed. The inquiries arose from a place of true curiosity, yet they were tinged with a morbid fascination. How does one endure the earthquake that reveals their life was built upon a fault line of deceit? Anger is a poor architect of the past. Jennifer, divided by Melissa, offered in one interview, "For months, I was consumed by a righteous fire. A fire for Patricia, who stole me away. A fire for the systems that failed to find me. A fire for whatever cosmic force allowed this wound to be inflicted. But that rage was a hollow inferno, building nothing but ash. So I chose a different path. I chose gratitude. Gratitude that I was found. Gratitude that I was raised in safety, even if under a false sky. Gratitude for the family that waited and the family that was gained. This does not erase the sorrow for what I lost, but I can hold both truths in my hands, the sorrow for the past and the grace of the present. This rare alchemy, the power to hold conflicting truths in a delicate balance without shattering, became Jennifer, divided by Melissa's greatest strength. She was the ghost of a stolen baby and the solid presence of a woman in her middle years. She was Jennifer, and she was Melissa. She was both the victim of an unspeakable crime and the architect of her own survival. She was all of these things, and these identities did not wage war within her. They coexisted in a quiet peace. Sarah's own world underwent a quiet revolution. For 51 years, the search for Jennifer had been her life's singular purpose, the star by which she navigated her existence. With Jennifer found, Sarah had to learn who she was in the light, now that the search was over. The shift was disorienting in ways she could not have foreseen. She had defined herself by the void for so long that to move beyond it felt like shedding a skin she had worn for a lifetime, like losing a part of her own identity. Yet in that void, a new purpose bloomed, a mission to guide others through the same dark woods she had traversed, to use her experience as a lantern for families lost in similar shadows, to champion better systems that might prevent such a theft from ever happening again. Her profound pain had been transmuted into a powerful expertise, and that expertise could now serve as a shield for others. And that, she found, meant everything. Their advocacy soon blossomed beyond the confines of their own story. They joined forces with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, creating a program forged to wield the power of consumer DNA against the shadows of cold cases. The program offered a financial lifeline for DNA tests to families bound by circumstance, provided guidance on how to decipher the cryptic results, and built bridges to genetic genealogists who could map the lost branches of family trees. Within the program's inaugural year, it illuminated the truth behind 6 cold cases of missing children. 6 families received the same sacred gifts the Morrisons had: answers, reunion, and a quiet closure. 6 mysteries that had seemed etched in stone were cracked open by the twin forces of DNA and unrelenting determination. Every victory was a kind of vindication, a proof that the Morrison family's ordeal could serve a purpose far beyond their own harrowing tale. If you wish to continue these journeys into the heart of mystery, press that subscribe button, for our own odyssey is drawing to a close. The legal and ethical echoes of the Morrison case continued to resonate through the halls of justice and society. Companies that mapped the human genome revisited their sacred vows of privacy, attempting to balance the scales between the needs of law enforcement and the sanctity of personal data. Police departments began the work of investing in genetic genealogy training. Lawmakers wrestled with the profound question of whether these genetic libraries should be open to criminal investigation, or if such access would violate the very liberties they were sworn to protect. The Morrisons themselves remained largely apart from these political tempests, choosing instead to offer a guiding hand to individual families over engaging in political crusades. Yet, they did lend their voices to one clear belief: that the science of DNA had resurrected their family and possessed the power to do the same for others. They supported law enforcement's access to genetic databases for the most grievous crimes and for cases of the missing, while still honoring the valid concerns for privacy that others held. It is a complex tapestry, Jennifer divided by Melissa mused when questioned on the ethics. I understand the instinct to shield one's genetic blueprint from the world. Privacy is a right to be cherished, but I also know that without this science, I would have walked to my grave a stranger to myself. My family would have perished under the weight of not knowing. Is that a better world? I do not believe so. A balance must be struck, though I do not claim to know where its fulcrum lies. I only know that this science gave me back my name, my blood, and my family, and for that, I am eternally grateful. The case also unearthed the unsettling question of justice, when the perpetrator has already passed into shadow. Patricia Williams had slipped beyond the reach of any earthly judgment, dying in peace before the truth could find her. Was there justice in this? The soul cries out, no, but what recourse remains? None. The dead cannot be brought to trial, cannot be made to answer for their sins, cannot be forced to offer the closure that the living so desperately crave. I confess, I yearned to stand before her, Jennifer, divided by Melissa, admitted. A universe of questions burned within me. Why me? Why did you pluck me from my life? Did you ever think of the family you shattered? Was your affection real? Or was I merely a ghost, meant to fill the space of the child you lost? I will never have the answers, and accepting that silence is a heavy burden. Yet it does not alter the fundamental truth. I am here, I am alive, and I have been found. That must be enough. By the midpoint of 2025, the storm of media attention had at last subsided. Their names no longer blazed across the headlines. Their story was no longer the trending obsession on the digital winds. The world's gaze had shifted to other scandals, other tragedies, other miracles. For this return to quietude, for the simple gift of privacy, the family was profoundly grateful, weary of being players in a drama they had never auditioned for. The ritual of their weekly dinners continued, as did the patient construction of bonds that, while never what they should have been, could still blossom with their own unique meaning. The children of Jennifer, divided by Melissa's children now called Sarah Grandma Sarah, accepting her into their world with that seamless adaptability unique to the young. The children of Amanda and Rebecca now had an aunt they had never known, and a new constellation of cousins to join their games at family gatherings. The family tree, a thing broken for 51 years, was now sprouting new, vibrant branches. The stolen decades were lost to history, but in their place, new moments were being forged, filled with memories unburdened by the ghosts of absence and the endless search. Looking back upon the labyrinth of the case, several threads reveal themselves as vital to its final unraveling. First, there was Sarah's unyielding spirit, her refusal to let the silence win. For 51 years she searched, she hoped, she refused to accept that she would never know. That sacred persistence was the faint heartbeat that kept the case from truly dying. Through the website, the social media page, the embers of media attention that she fanned into flame. Second, the relentless march of science, which brought the miracle of consumer DNA testing to the masses. Without the digital archives of 23andMe or Ancestry.com, vast libraries of our shared human story, this mystery would have remained locked in eternity. The technology had to be born, had to become accessible, had to weave itself into the fabric of society before its threads could reveal these hidden kinships. Third was Rebecca's simple, unassuming choice to take a DNA test. It was not a calculated move in some grand strategy. She was not setting out to solve a kidnapping half a century old. She was merely a curious traveler into her own past. But that $99 purchase on a November evening became the key that unlocked a mystery that had defied all professional inquiry for 5 decades. It is a testament to how the most profound choices are often made in whispers, their true weight unknown to us. Fourth was the courage of Jennifer, divided by Melissa, to answer a stranger's call from the digital void. She could have cast it aside, dismissed it as the ramblings of a madwoman, and sealed the door to her past forever. Instead, she took hold of the thread and followed it, even as it threatened to unravel the very tapestry of her world. Such a journey requires a courage few of us can fathom needing to possess. And finally, there was the family's unified choice to stand in the wreckage and build anew. The revelation could have been the tremor that brought everything crashing down. The weight of the trauma was more than enough to justify their collapse. Instead, they chose healing. They chose one another. They chose the difficult, beautiful, and complicated work of being a family. And that choice, the daily recommitment to one another in the face of all that had happened, is the true heart of this saga. It is not the crime, nor the 51 years of desolate separation, not even the stunning revelation born of science. The true story breathes in the quiet aftermath, in the sacred spaces of therapy, in the hesitant grace of shared meals, and in the slow, steady work of building trust. The true narrative is one of human resilience, of how souls survive the impossible and find the strength to create meaning from the deepest of losses. If these shadowed corridors of human mystery call to you, leave your mark in the comments below and whisper the names of other lost stories you wish for me to illuminate. As the final chapter of this haunting tale draws to a close, certain truths echo from the darkness, not as sermons, but as stark, vital whispers on how we navigate the shadows and guard the ones we hold dear. First, we must honor the primal hum of intuition. Jessica, Sarah's roommate, felt a cold premonition descend upon her that August morning. Ruth Johnson's presence was a dissonance, a figure shrouded in layers against the brutal heat, a walking secret. Jessica's instincts were a siren's wail in the quiet of her soul, yet she silenced them for the sake of convenience and politeness. Heed that internal alarm. When a feeling of wrongness descends, it is often truth itself, cloaked in shadow. You have every right to say no, to question the facade, to refuse to place a child's hand into one that feels like winter. Second, we must tread carefully through the modern wilderness of digital classifieds. In 1971, Sarah cast her line into the waters of a newspaper ad, a common act for thousands of parents, never knowing a predator lurked beneath the surface. Today, those waters are the sprawling, anonymous oceans of Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and countless other platforms. Be vigilant about the strangers you invite to cross the threshold of your life. Meet on neutral ground, in the light of day. Seek out their histories. Let not desperation be the ghost that guides your hand. Third, we must seek the face behind the mask. Ruth Johnson was a name spun from ether, a phantom identity Sarah never sought to anchor in reality. Today, we possess lanterns in the fog of anonymity. We can summon histories from search engines and social media. We can verify the coordinates of a life. Wield these tools. If someone refuses to offer you a verifiable past, see it for what it is, a crimson banner heralding a storm of deceit. Fourth, leave a map of your journey for those who remain behind. This is a creed for both the young and the old. Had Jennifer been old enough to chronicle her departure with a stranger, had a single true address for Ruth Johnson existed, the path of the investigation would not have begun in a void. Share your coordinates with those you trust. It is not paranoia that compels us to share our path. It is the wisdom of the navigator who knows that any soul can be swept off course. Fifth, we learn that hope can be a stubborn, unyielding flame in the longest of nights. The Morrison family could have surrendered to the narrative that Jennifer was a ghost, a story with no final page. Instead, for 51 winters of silence, they tended to the shrine of her memory, their search a constant prayer. That persistence finally fractured the silence. If a loved one has vanished into the mist, keep their name alive. Let DNA be your oracle. Let social media be your herald. Time itself can be made to surrender its secrets. Sixth, understand that the helix of our DNA is a scroll containing histories we never knew were written. Before you commit your essence to a vial, consider the truths you may unearth. You could discover kin who exist only in whispers, or find the bedrock of your family history is but sand. You could learn that your life began with a secret, that your blood does not match your name. These revelations can mend the soul or shatter the world you thought you knew. Be certain you are prepared to read the story it tells, for its ink is permanent. And finally, we must learn to distinguish the cold shape of justice from the warm embrace of closure. Patricia Williams slipped beyond the grasp of earthly judgment before she could answer for the life she stole. No trial was held, no sentence passed. The void where retribution was meant to be is a source of profound frustration. Yet the family found a different kind of peace, the quiet solace of truth, a reunion that mended the torn fabric of their world. Sometimes, in the aftermath of a storm, this is the only harbor we can find. The saga of the Morrison family whispers a timeless truth, that the impossible is merely a shadow that time has not yet chased away, that even after half a century, the most tangled knots of mystery can be undone, that a family can endure the deepest chasm of loss and still find its way back to the light, that science, fueled by a relentless heart, can conjure miracles from the very air we breathe. Jennifer Morrison, a name stolen from the world on August 23, 1971, was reborn to her family in November of 2022 through a simple act of faith by a sister who dared to ask a question of the past. For 51 years, she lived under a borrowed name, a ghost in her own life, just miles from the family whose search was a constant, silent prayer. Her story is a symphony of sorrow and triumph, a testament to the stubborn resilience of truth against the encroaching dark. If this story has stirred something deep within you, if its chill has traced a path along your spine, if it has made you ponder the fragile threads of your own lineage, then press that subscribe button and join our circle. We are the keepers of these tales, the real, the human, the mysteries, wrestled from the clutches of the impossible, week after week. Let your voice be heard in the comments. Tell us from what corner of the world you watch, and name the next enigma you wish us to explore together. For this community of ours is a fortress against forgetting, a place where we share these chronicles, where we keep the embers of these cases glowing in the public heart, ensuring no victim ever truly fades to black. Thank you for walking with me through the labyrinth of this wild journey. The Morrison family's odyssey is one of the most staggering I have ever had the honor to recount, and I am humbled to have shared it with you. Remember this, the truth within our blood wins, the light of science wins, the unwavering spirit wins, and a family, however shattered by time and tragedy, can find its way home if the search never ends. Go safely into the world, trust the whispers of your soul, and never abandon the search for those you love. Until we meet again in the shadows of another story, this is your true crime storyteller, signing off. Peace be with you.